The letter arrived on a windy afternoon, stamped with official HOA markings.
Mark Thompson, a U.S. Army Staff Sergeant, had been away for almost a year on deployment overseas.
He'd left behind his cozy suburban home in good hands, or so he thought.
But when he returned, he found strangers living inside his house, laughing on his porch, and grilling in his backyard. His name wasn't even on the mailbox anymore. Mark stood frozen at the edge of the driveway, disbelief tightening in his chest. The house he'd built with years of sacrifice was no longer his, or at least, that's what the HOA claimed. The new tenants waved casually, assuming he was just another neighbor, as he tried to piece together what had happened. His neighbor Mrs. Benson ran up, whispering urgently, "Mark, the HOA rented your house out months ago. They said it was abandoned."
Abandoned?
His mortgage was paid, taxes filed, everything in order.
He couldn't believe it.
"There must be some mistake," he muttered, but inside, a storm was already brewing. The letter explained it all. The HOA had declared his home community property after extended absence and leased it to maintain neighborhood standards.
That night, sitting in his truck, Mark replayed the moment he left for duty. He'd promised his platoon brothers that home would always wait for them. Now, he wasn't even sure he had one left. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going down quietly. He opened his phone and texted a single line to his old military group chat, "Guys, they stole my house." By morning, Mark stood in front of the HOA office.
A polished sign read, "Meadow Creek Association, Preserving Perfection." Inside, behind a wide desk sat Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, calm, confident, and ready for a fight. "Mr. Thompson," she began, folding her hands neatly.
"We followed proper procedure.
The community can't have unattended homes."
Mark clenched his jaw. Unattended? I was serving overseas.
"I notified this office months before I left."
Karen smiled coldly. "Unfortunately, that notice wasn't filed correctly. You see, the HOA board voted to lease your home. The rent covers maintenance costs."
He tried to keep calm, but her tone cut deep.
"You rented out a soldier's home while he was defending this country?" Karen's voice didn't waver.
"Rules are rules, Sergeant." Walking out, Mark saw two unfamiliar cars parked in his driveway.
The sound of kids playing echoed through the open window. For a moment, he thought of the photo of his late wife that used to sit on that windowsill, now gone. That night, he couldn't sleep. The injustice burned in his chest.
The HOA had paperwork, signatures, and a wall of legal jargon. But Mark had something stronger: loyalty, and a team that never left one of their own behind. He opened his old platoon group chat again. This time, he didn't just send a message. He sent coordinates. Within minutes, replies came flooding in. "Roger that, Sarge.
About time for a mission." Mark smiled faintly in the dark. The HOA had no idea what was coming.
The next weekend, the quiet neighborhood of Meadow Creek saw something it had never witnessed before: a convoy of trucks, flags, and men in uniform pulling up to Mark's street. They weren't carrying weapons, but they carried purpose. As the engines cut off, 10 men stepped out, each one part of Mark's old unit. These were brothers, men who had shared foxholes, hunger, laughter, and loss.
They didn't need orders, they knew why they were there. "Home sweet home, huh?"
joked Corporal Diaz, eyeing the HOA signs plastered everywhere.
"Yeah," Mark replied, "let's take it back."
Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering as the group unloaded boxes, furniture, and old military gear right onto the lawn. Within minutes, Mark's house looked like a base camp. When Karen arrived in her polished SUV, her jaw dropped.
"What on earth is going on here?"
Mark handed her a printed document.
"Official military notice. Temporary housing for returning personnel, signed and dated."
She snatched the paper.
"You can't just..." "Yes, I can," he cut in. "You rented out a soldier's home illegally. Now, it's occupied by the rightful owner and his platoon." Karen stormed off, fuming.
The men watched her drive away, half amused, half ready. Inside, Mark stood by the window, watching the sunset.
"This isn't over," he said quietly. "She's going to fight back."
And he was right. Karen wasn't done. The next morning, the HOA posted eviction notices on every window. The platoon just smiled.
"Guess we're not leaving, huh?" Karen called an emergency board meeting. They're squatting in that property. We'll file for immediate removal. The HOA board members nodded, though uneasily. One of them whispered, "He's a veteran, Karen." This could backfire. But Karen's pride had no brakes. The rules apply to everyone. That afternoon, 2 officers arrived only to be greeted by a line of polite, smiling veterans offering them coffee and donuts. The officers inspected the paperwork and found that Mark's documents were valid. "Seems everything's in order," one said before leaving. Karen was furious. She marched to Mark's house, face red with rage. "You're making a mockery of this community." Mark kept calm. "This community made a mockery of my service." That night, Mark's friends helped fix the garden, painted the fence, and even repaired the mailbox. The neighbors began waving to them, some even dropping by with food. The narrative was changing, and the HOA hated it. By the end of the week, Karen had one last card to play. She called a news reporter, planning to twist the story. When the crew arrived, Karen posed dramatically, claiming, "A group of unruly veterans has taken over a peaceful community." But when the reporter interviewed the neighbors, the truth began to unfold. One elderly man said, "That soldier owns this house. He's the reason we can even live free here." Karen's expression faltered as cameras rolled. The story was spreading, and not the way she planned. Within 24 hours, the story went viral. Headlines read, "Veteran returns to find HOA rented out his home." Mark's phone buzzed nonstop. Veterans, neighbors, and even strangers sent messages of support. People offered legal aid, donations, even volunteers to help rebuild. The once hostile HOA street was now filled with American flags and homemade signs reading, "Welcome home, Sergeant Thompson." Karen's plan had backfired spectacularly. She arrived at the HOA office to find reporters waiting. One shouted, "Did you really rent out a deployed soldier's house for profit?" Her smile faltered. No comment. Meanwhile, Mark and his platoon began restoring the cabin-style home's beauty, fixing walls, repainting fences, and mowing lawns. Every action was a message: "This is our home. We're not leaving." The neighbors who once feared HOA rules now joined them. Potlucks replaced fines, laughter replaced complaints. Karen tried to issue new violation letters, but no one took her seriously anymore. The HOA board itself started questioning her authority. One evening, as Mark sat on his porch watching kids play in the yard again, he whispered, "It's starting to feel like home." But he knew the final showdown hadn't come yet. Karen was quiet, too quiet. And Mark had learned long ago, silence before a storm meant something was coming. Karen filed a lawsuit, confident she'd finally win. She claimed breach of HOA terms and demanded eviction. Mark appeared in court, wearing his uniform jacket. Behind him sat his entire platoon and dozens of local supporters. Karen's lawyer began, "This is a matter of community order." Mark's lawyer interrupted, handing the judge a folder. "Your Honor, this includes proof of ownership, military deployment orders, and a legal notice of property protection under the Service Members Civil Relief Act." The courtroom went silent. The judge looked over the papers and frowned at Karen. "You leased a soldier's home while he was deployed? Case dismissed. And I suggest the HOA review its moral compass." Karen's face turned pale. Cameras flashed. Reporters surrounded Mark as he walked out. He simply said, "Justice served. That's all I ever wanted." Back home, the platoon celebrated with laughter and barbecue. The neighbors joined in, music filled the air, and for the first time in months, peace settled over Meadow Creek. Karen quietly resigned from her position days later. Months later, the house looked better than ever. Fresh paint, a rebuilt porch, a garden full of sunflowers, a symbol of hope. Mark stood on the lawn, watching the flag ripple in the breeze. His platoon had returned to their lives, but the bond remained unbroken. The house that once symbolized loss now represented unity. Neighbors waved as they passed, and new families moved in nearby, free from HOA tyranny. The new board even invited Mark to serve as community advisor. He smiled and said, "Only if the first rule is, no one loses their home for serving their country." They all agreed. As the sun dipped below the hills, Mark sat quietly on his porch. He could still hear the laughter of his platoon, the echo of their boots, the clinking of soda cans. It was peace, hard earned and well deserved, and on his mailbox, freshly painted, was his name again, Sergeant Mark Thompson. Home isn't just a place, he thought. It's the people who stand with you when you have nothing left. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.